Pokemon is an absolute cultural juggernaut. From the humble beginnings of Red and Blue on the old gray brick Game Boy, to Scarlet and Violet on the Switch, and all of the other games and spin-offs in between, Pokemon has remained a sensation the world over. People have been enjoying these games for decades and over time have found ways to reinvent how they enjoy the franchise. In the last few years, one particular way of playing Pokemon has become incredibly popular: the Nuzlocke. A Nuzlocke is a self-imposed set of rules that a person adds to their playthrough of Pokemon. You see, in a normal run of Pokemon, you're free to go around and catch whichever Pokemon you want, as many of them as you want, fight with them however you want, and if there's a part of the game you're having a hard time with, well, you can just keep smashing your face into it over and over until eventually you make it through. The only way you can really lose a Pokemon game is if you quit, but a Nuzlocke changes this. A Nuzlocke has 3 basic rules. Number 1, you can only catch the first Pokemon you encounter on each route or dungeon. Number 2, if your Pokemon ever faints, it actually permanently dies and must be released or stored in a designated death box in your PC. Number 3, if you ever lose a fight, the run is officially lost and you must start over. There's a 4th unofficial rule that you have to nickname all of your Pokemon to give them more sentimental value, but this one, it isn't necessary. But you're lame if you don't do it. Nuzlocke initially started off as a niche way to play the game that was geared more towards telling a story in a webcomic or other type of media, but it has since evolved into a way to challenge players and test their skills as a true epic gamer. Nowadays, Nuzlocke are everywhere. Many big-time streamers and other content creators have done their own Nuzlocke runs, and some have even built whole careers out of doing Nuzlocke. I myself do Nuzlocke quite frequently, and I thought it was high time I threw my hat into the ring of Nuzlocke content creation. Hi, my name is Chev, and welcome to episode 0 of the Every-Gen Hardcore Nuzlocke Gauntlet! I'm going to be spending this episode going over the challenge I'm planning on attempting, all the rules I'll be imposing, and some other details before we officially jump into the challenge. This is going to be a long and difficult journey, and I'm excited to start it with you. So what exactly is this challenge? Well, as you might have already been able to infer, this is a Nuzlocke. But it won't just be any Nuzlocke. This will be a hardcore Nuzlocke. A hardcore Nuzlocke has all of the same rules as a standard Nuzlocke, but it has a couple of extra restrictions tacked on as well. The extra rules for hardcore Nuzlocke are: number 1, no healing items can be used in battle. Number 2, the game must be played on set mode. And number 3, level caps will be enforced for gym fights. So what do these rules mean, and how do they change the game? Well, healing items are pretty self-explanatory. In a standard Nuzlocke, you are able to use healing items in battle to restore your HP or cure status conditions. The game is balanced around this and almost expects you to use them, as most boss fights in the game also will use healing items. However, while the AI typically has a limit on how many items it can use, the player has no such limit on them, the only one being their stock of items. If you have a particularly unlucky fight where you're getting crit and haxed over and over again, it's fine so long as you have items to heal with. But in a hardcore Nuzlocke, this isn't an option. It means that if you run into a poor bit of luck or something doesn't go quite as you had planned, you won't be able to heal your way out of it. Now, onto the second rule. Pokemon has 2 different battle settings, Switch and Set. The default setting is Switch, so if you go into a new game and change nothing, the game will automatically be on Switch mode. When playing on Switch, during trainer battles, if you defeat one of their Pokemon, the game will tell you what the AI is going to send out next, and it gives you the option to switch in a different Pokemon. This gives you a straight-up free switch, which allows you to constantly stay in control of the game and dictate the matchup. If you build a team that has counters to every Pokemon a trainer has, you're pretty much guaranteed to win without any major complications. Yeah, it's pretty broken. However, in a hardcore run, we'll be playing on Set, which gets rid of this entirely. Now if we defeat a trainer's Pokemon, they just send out their next one. And if that matchup isn't good for the Pokemon we already have in, we have to manually switch our mons, which gives the AI a chance to get an attack, status, or setup move off, which is a lot riskier. This in combination with no healing items in battle makes switching Pokemon potentially very punishing. The third rule is a simple one, level caps. How most people run level caps is that you aren't allowed to level your Pokemon past the level of the next gym leader's strongest Pokemon. One of the ways I'm sure we've all beaten gym leaders that we were stuck on when we were younger was to just grind up your Charizard to be 20 levels over the gym leader, and then curb stomp them without mercy. Turns out, Misty Starmie isn't so tough when you've got a level 49 Pokemon ready to murk it. But with level caps, we will not be able to cheese them like this. If at any point in the game I overlevel a Pokemon past the cap, I will have to store it in my PC until I beat the next gym leader. So those are the rules for a hardcore Nuzlocke, but as you can tell from the title of this challenge, we still aren't quite done with the rules. As I said in the beginning, Pokemon has a lot of games, spanning decades. We are currently, as of 2025, in Generation 9. That's a lot of damn Pokemon. Now, it's one thing to do a hardcore Nuzlocke of a single Pokemon game. That, in and of itself, is already a pretty respectable feat. But what about multiple hardcore Nuzlockes? What about, I don't know, a hardcore Nuzlocke of a game from each generation of Pokemon? Now that's pretty spicy. That would take a lot of time, patience, and consistency to beat. But what if we took it one step further? What if I had to do a hardcore Nuzlocke of every generation of mainline Pokemon games in order, and if at any point I lose, I have to go all the way back to Gen 1. Now that sounds like a challenge to me, and that's exactly what I plan on doing. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This sounds crazy, right? Insane? Bonkers? Bananas even? Has anyone even done anything like this before? And that's a good question. I actually looked into this a little, and I learned a few things. First, there already is a Nuzlocke variant similar to this, called a Genlock. You essentially do what I'm doing. Play through each generation with a Nuzlocke, and if you lose at any point, the run is over. However, there's two key differences. First, Genlocks seem to be mostly ran as standard Nuzlocks, though there's nothing stopping you from doing them hardcore. And the second distinction, which is a big one, is that after you beat one game, you get to import the surviving Hall of Fame team from the last game into the next one in their unevolved form, which means you could theoretically run with the same team from Gen 1 all the way to Gen 9. However, I will not be doing this. Each new game will be a fresh start, and I have to beat it from scratch. I have also found Reddit threads of people coming up with ideas similar to this and saying they've started runs, but I actually haven't been able to find anyone who has demonstrably completed a run like this before. Maybe someone has and I just never found proof of it, so if you have any proof of someone completing a challenge like this, or you have yourself, leave it down in the comments. However, it wouldn't surprise me if no one has been able to. A challenge like this requires a ton of game knowledge, consistent good play, patience, and, most importantly, luck to pull it off. It doesn't hurt to have a lot of free time too. Really, the only example I can find of someone really having a go at it was this small-time Twitch channel that hasn't really been active in a few years. It looks like he even got as far as Gen 4 at some points, but not much further. His name is, how do you say this? It's Chevalier? Oh, wait, that's me. That's right. Back in 2020 when the, thing was going on, I decided to give this little old challenge a shot. In fact, most of the B-roll I've been using for this video has been from my old channel. Granted, at that time, I wasn't doing them as hardcore Nuzlocks, but other than that, the challenge was pretty much the same. I had a blast doing it. It was a great way to keep me and my friends entertained while everything was shut down. And I got pretty far too, making it deep into Gen 4. Unfortunately, I somehow lost the save file of that run, and I got so discouraged from that, I ended up just quitting the challenge. It felt like such a bad way for my personal best attempt to end, and I just didn't have the will to pick it back up. However, in the back of my mind, I always had this itch, this longing, this what if I kept going? And as I watched Nuzlocke content take off shortly after, I found myself continuing to yearn for the gauntlet. It was calling to me, beckoning. Well, almost 5 years later, I'm back, baby, and I'm ready to take another crack at it. Throughout the series, I'm going to sprinkle in little Easter eggs from that first run back in the day for the real ones in chat who still remember and were there. From now on, I will be referring to that series as the old lore. But before we depart on our journey, there's a few other rules I want to establish. These aren't rules that have much to do with the gameplay, but rather how the challenge will be structured. The first one is that I have to play the original games for each generation, no remakes. That's right, Gen 1 means red or blue, not fire red or leaf green. Same with Gens 2, 3, and 4. Now, which of the games from each generation I play will be chosen by me at my own discretion. If you somehow didn't know, each generation of Pokemon has several versions of what is pretty much the same game, with a few exceptions. We'll get there. For the first 4 generations, it was 2 separate games with minor differences between them, followed by a 3rd edition that was almost meant to be a definitive edition. Which version of each game I play will vary depending on each generation. For Gen 1, I'm not going to be playing Yellow, because it's a pain in the ass to Nuzlocke because you can't get rid of your starting Pikachu no matter what. I'll be doing Crystal in Gen 2 because I like that game. In Gen 3, I'll be doing either Ruby or Sapphire because Emerald has a bunch of extra stuff that pads on more time, and also, in my opinion, Ruby and Sapphire are more difficult. And then for Gen 4, I'll be doing Platinum because Diamond and Pearl have god-awful pools of Pokemon to work with. Things start to get tricky from here. Gens 6, 8, and 9 will be straightforward as there are no extra games there, but Gen 5 and 7 are the exceptions. Gen 5 has 2 sets of games. You have Black and White as the original releases, but then Game Freak did something they've never done before. Instead of making a definitive edition that bridges the gap between those 2 games, they made actual direct sequels, Black 2 and White 2. These aren't just remixes of the original games. They are entirely new games whose story takes place after the first games. Unlike the last generations where all 3 of the games were pretty much the same and playing one of them would cover your bases for that generation, that just doesn't feel like the case for Gen 5. Which is why I decided that in order to consider Gen 5 completed, I will have to beat one game from both sets. This sounds like a tall order, because it is. But given that these 2 sets of games are completely different from each other, it's the only way I could do it and feel like I really completed Gen 5. Gen 7 is in a similar state. After Sun and Moon came out, they released Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which people at first wondered if this was going to be more of a Gen 5 deal, but to our disappointment, it wasn't. Ultra Sun and Moon were more like the definitive editions we were used to back in the day. The same core game with some slight alterations to it, but this time, they made 2 of them. I wonder what motivated them to do that? For Gen 7, I will just be playing Pokemon Sun, as I don't think there are enough differences between the games to justify playing both of them like with Gen 5. I do own Ultra Moon, but I think I prefer Sun because, I don't know, I just like the vibes. It's just the vibes. There's no other reason why I wouldn't want to play Ultra Moon. Another rule I'm going to implement is that my starter will be chosen at random. I will be using the randomly generated trainer ID to determine this. The last number of the trainer ID will pick who my starter is. If it ends in 1 through 3, it'll be the grass type. 4 to 6 will be water, 7 to 9 will be fire, and 0 will be my choice. I am doing this to give some variance between my runs. This will prevent me from always picking the optimal starter in each game, which makes it more potentially challenging. And I'm also running on the assumption that I might lose at some point, and I'll be playing through some games multiple times, so this should switch things up between each run. I will also be banning legendaries and mythics from every run. I know not all legendaries are made equal, and some of them could definitely be used without feeling too overpowered, but a lot of them have stats that are so high that they would steamroll through the games they are in, which would defeat the purpose of this being a challenge. It just makes more sense to ban them all. Some of the more astute viewers might know what this means for a certain generation. Don't worry, I know. I am also not doing any of the post-game content. Once I defeat the Elite Four and Champion, I will consider the run complete and we will be moving on to the next generation. I can already hear some people in the comments saying, well, you have to beat Red in Gen 2 or else it doesn't count. Do it or no balls! And to that I say, shut up, I have 10 games to go through, I don't have time for the post-game. I'm beating Lance and I'm calling it a day. Also, the only exception to this rule will be Gen 5, because it has another fight after the champion that is meant to be the actual final boss. All other games will be declared beaten after the champion. The only other rule change I'm going to do is that I'm going to be using PK Hex to evolve Trade and Friendship Pokemon. I know not everyone likes this, especially with Friendship evolutions, but we have a lot of games to get through, and if I have to stop and grind for hours just to get those Pokemon, I am going to burn out on this challenge really quick. I'm not sure how I feel about some of the potential later grinding things like berries, if I just want to hack those in later instead of grinding for them. I'll cross that bridge when I get there. Oh, I'm also going to be taking the rare candy pill, because grinding is boring and takes too much time, and also not grinding off wild Pokemon can actually make the game harder in the long run. The real ones know why. Finally, I just want to manage everyone's expectations here. You see, I have done several Nuzlockes before, and I do have a pretty decent grasp of this game and its ins and outs, but I am by no means an expert. I'm not going to be claiming the title of World's Best Nuzlocker anytime soon. I'm just a guy, a little dude. I never even made it past Roxanne and Emerald Kaizo. I'm a grown man still playing Pokemon, going into his 30s. So keep that in mind if you're watching my videos and you see me make a less than optimal play, and you feel the need to point it out in the comments down below, wink wink. This series isn't about watching someone who is a cut above the rest. It's about a guy playing games and struggling in an unreasonably long and potentially punishing challenge. And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. I just thought this would be fun, and you're more than welcome to tag along and watch the madness. And with that, I think I have covered all of the preliminary information you will need to know before we get into this thing. If you made it to the end of this video and you're interested in following this adventure, please like and subscribe. I'm planning on having episode 1 be up shortly after this video goes live, so please be on the lookout for it. Now, without further ado, let's get into the first step of our journey on the every-gen hardcore Nuzlocke, Generation 1.